In 2019, I made the decision to host a Halloween party with some of my old college pals. Even though we had all moved on and it had been years since our graduation, this celebration was meant to be our chance to get back together. The most successful among us, Alex, offered to throw the party in his large suburban home. It was flawless. We all agreed, thinking it would be lovely to go back to the good old days, except the tiny dorm quarters and cheap beer. The house was decked out in full Halloween decor the night of the celebration. Fake cobwebs draped from the ceiling, jack-o'-lanterns burned ominously on the front porch, and spooky music played gently in the background. There was a cozy, vintage feel to the entire facility. Alex had clearly spent a good deal of money to make the evening very memorable. I was dressed as a zombie nurse, something I pulled together quickly, and I arrived a bit late. I spotted familiar individuals smiling and sipping when I went in. Though some of us had become slightly grayer, we were mostly the same individuals. My old pals hugged me and said something about how long it had been since we'd seen each other. However, as the evening wore on, I became aware of something odd. This man was there. Even with the swarm of costumed guests, he was unique. While most people were decked up as witches, vampires, or movie characters for Halloween, this gentleman was wearing a mask shaped like a person. And not just any mask. It appeared as though someone had stretched a real human face over his own. The skin was pallid and almost waxy, the eyes sunken in. It was uncomfortable, to put it mildly. His outfit was just incorrect. Initially, I assumed he was an unknown buddy of Alex's from work. However, each time I looked at him, he was simply staring at me, not even drinking, not participating in the talks. He stayed in the corner and watched, without talking to anyone. I couldn't get his strange presence out of my head the whole night. Alex eventually caught wind of him too. I witnessed him approaching the man and asking him something, most likely something like, "Who are you?" or "Who is your friend?" However, the man merely stood there without saying anything. I noticed Alex growing irritated. Under the dark party lights, his expression tightened. Because Alex being Alex, he was not going to let it go. With the likely intention of forcing the man to take off his mask, he reached up. At that point, everything altered. The man took a step back, reached inside his jacket, and produced a pistol all in one swift action. Everything abruptly halted, including the music, joking, and small talk. Everyone halted, attempting to process what was occurring as they wide-eyed stared at this man in a mask. I could feel the pounding of my heart in my throat. He spoke in a low, harsh voice, telling everyone to keep quiet. "Empty your wallets, phones, jewelry, and pockets. Lay it all down on the ground." Fear permeated the air. The space seemed smaller, as if the walls were closing in on us. I didn't even consider fighting back or running. Not one of us did. It seemed like we were all immobilized by the prospect of the gun. People started taking items out of their pockets and letting them fall to the ground gradually. There was a clatter of jewelry, wallets thudding. Other than my labored breathing, it was the only sound in the room. I cast a quick glance around to see if anyone was making any kind of effort to put a stop to this. However, nobody moved. Everybody was still, with pale faces. Alex's eyes were racing back and forth as he tried to decide what to do next. Subsequently, I caught a glimpse of her, Megan. Quiet yet intelligent, she had been my roommate in college. She was moving slowly in the direction of the restroom, staying hidden from the group while keeping her eyes on the door. My stomach became constricted. Had the man seen her? It seemed he did not. All of his attention was fixed on the people in front of him. When the masked guy turned to face Megan, she had already reached the restroom and vanished behind the door. In the hopes that he hadn't noticed her, I held my breath. He continued, surveying the room with the gun. "Everyone stay calm. Nobody should suffer harm." Minutes felt like hours as they passed. He picked up the stack of pilfered goods and shoved them into a bag as he strolled about. I was so terrified that I was trembling uncontrollably. Then it was done, just as swiftly as it had begun. Backing toward the door, the man with the gun slipped out into the darkness. For a time, we remained still, too shocked to comprehend the events that had just transpired. My realization that I had been holding my breath came when I heard the distant sound of sirens. Shortly after, the cops arrived, having been summoned by Megan from the restroom. Though trembling, she felt secure. They examined the area when they got there, but the man with the mask had vanished by then. Like a phantom, he had disappeared into the darkness. The aftermath seemed unreal. In an attempt to put together the events of the previous moment, we all provided our statements to the police. The man wasn't just any random crook, as it turned out. He was a member of a gang, a bunch of robbers who had been showing up at events for months. They would blend in, bide their time till the ideal opportunity to rob everyone blind. But he hadn't expected the police to arrive so soon this time. It took them a few days to apprehend him. Both the gun and the mask were discovered in his hiding place, along with a number of items that were pilfered from other people. The cops told us we were fortunate. Fortunately, Megan had the audacity to sneak away and make a phone call. Fortunately, nobody was harmed. Years later, though, the vision of that mask still haunts me. I was haunted by more than simply the robbery. The mask appeared to have been alive due to its appearance, and even though I know he's locked up, there are moments when I think I can still feel those lifeless eyes watching me. That night will never leave my recollection. Like the face on that mask, it's burned into my memory, pale, soulless, and much too genuine. If this is your first visit, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and click the bell symbol for forthcoming terrifying stories before we go on to the next story. We are in need of your help. Kindly tell your loved ones and friends about these tales. Regards. Halloween was the greatest night of the year when I was 9 years old. For weeks, my friend Jack and I eagerly anticipated it. Like every year, we got all dolled up, took our pillowcases, and headed outside to pick up candies from our neighbors. Children costumed as ghosts, superheroes, and monsters filled the streets. It was a chilly day. At first, everything felt normal. People smiled at us, dropped candy into our bags, and told us to have fun. But as we ventured farther from home, the streets grew quieter, fewer children were out, and the houses became more dispersed. It was after dark when we noticed him. It was pitch black outside, with the only source of light coming from street lamps and the glowing jack-o'-lanterns sitting on porches. At the end of the street, he was standing close to an ancient house that had been vacant for many years. The man was tall, dressed in black clothing, and he merely observed us. We didn't give it much thought at first. He may have been a father waiting for his children. But as we continued on our way, we were aware that he was still present and observing us. His face was obscured by the darkness and difficult to discern. We discussed him in whispers to one another, but we made an effort to dismiss it and go on. I was eager to get home since our bags were starting to grow heavy with sweets. We were driving down a section of road with mostly empty lots and woods instead of numerous houses. That's when I became aware of something odd. Even though the man was moving slowly, he was undoubtedly keeping up with us. Jack's expression clenched as he realized it too. Increasingly, he peered back over his shoulder. Trying not to seem bothered, I responded, "Let's just keep going." But I was uncomfortable inside. He had no business following us in that manner. A few more minutes later, the man performed an even more bizarre act. He began yelling at us. At first, his voice was low, scratchy, and difficult to hear, but it became more apparent as we continued to trek. "Do you want more sweets, kids?" Down the deserted road, his voice resounded. We halted our stroll, and I pivoted to gaze at him. He raised a big plastic bag full of candies in his palm. I had a strange combination of perplexity and joy. Extra candies? That sounded fantastic, but it didn't seem quite right. What makes a mature guy stand by himself in the dark and give sweets to strangers' children? Though I was curious, the idea of more sweets piqued my interest. I told Jack that I thought we needed to head over. However, he shook his head, looking pale. He took hold of my arm and restrained me. "No," he responded. "We have to get out. That man is incorrect. Seems like he wants to bring us." It was hard for me to believe him. Jack was constantly more cautious than I was, fretting about seemingly insignificant details. However, I could sense genuine terror in his eyes this time. There was something strange about the man's manner of standing and gazing. I became self-conscious. For a little period, we were at a loss for what to do. The man moved a step toward us. He grinned, but it was not a congenial one. It looked forced and overly broad, as if he was trying to be kind. Once more, he waved the bag. "Come on," he urged. "It's Halloween. I have an abundance of candies for you." I realized then that Jack was correct. This was not how things usually were. There was a problem with this dude. We had to leave that place as soon as possible. Jack murmured, "Run." We stopped wasting time there. With our candy bags thumping our legs, we turned and ran down the street. Behind us, the man's footfalls were heavy and quick. He was after us. My chest throbbed with my heartbeat. The man's breathing was louder in the still night as I could hear him moving closer. I didn't turn around. I was unable to. My only concern was returning home and reaching safety. Even though our house was just a few blocks away, it seemed far away. As I forced myself to run faster, my legs hurt. Jack was racing with all he had, right by my side without a word. As we arrived at our street, the man was still following us, even closer than before. His boots thumping on the concrete gave me the impression that he was immediately behind me. We hurried up to my house, cutting across the yard of a neighbor and hopping over their shrubs. With trembling hands, I struggled to turn the doorknob and eventually managed to open it. After hurling ourselves inside, Jack and I forcefully shut the door. Breathing heavily, we stood there in the hallway listening. There was only silence for a few seconds. Then we heard heavy, sluggish footsteps outside. They halted directly in front of our entrance. I held my breath, waiting, my heart pounding. The man was standing there, directly outside, yet he made no attempt to enter. Then, a second later, the footsteps were moving away. Peeping through the window, we observed him vanish into the darkness. He just left as if nothing had occurred, not even turning to look back. We kept the events we had to ourselves. I'm not sure why. Maybe we just wanted to forget it, or maybe we felt no one would believe us. However, I will never forget how that man had followed, glared, and hounded us. I still ponder about him on Halloween's past, wondering about his true identity and desires. Though Jack and I never discussed it further, I believe he recalls as well. Regardless of how hard you try, it's the type of thing you never forget. When we moved into the ancient house, we didn't believe any of the stories. Conversations took place. That was the life in tiny towns. The same thing kept coming up no matter who we met. They would say that house is haunted. However, we dismissed it with laughter. We had no belief in spirits or ghosts. Our goal was to make the home our own, patch it up, and move on from all the drama. Yes, it was an ancient home. There were cobwebs in the corners, the flooring groaned with every step, and the paint was chipped. It was charming, though. There was a certain something that felt appropriate. Perhaps it was the large windows or the tall ceilings. It was capable of more. That was our main concern. All was typical for the first several weeks. The windows were repaired by us, filled up the gaps in the walls, and began to settle in. However, Halloween arrived. That night, the air felt thicker and colder. The moon was low in the sky, and the wind was rattling the windows. While my spouse and children were getting ready for bed upstairs, I remained up, curled up by the living room fire. For an instant, it seemed as though the house was breathing alongside me as the flames flickered and threw shadows on the walls. At that point, I heard it. From below, there was a faint sound, almost like a whisper. I initially believed it to be the wind or the house settling, but the low, continuous hum persisted. I made an effort to ignore it, but my curiosity won out. After grabbing a flashlight, I made my way to the basement. As I lowered myself, the wooden steps groaned beneath my weight. The unfinished basement featured shelves filled with outdated, abandoned tools and a frigid cement floor. I looked about with the flashlight, and up until I noticed the door, everything appeared to be the same. It was leaning against the distant wall and seemed out of place. It wasn't there previously, I was certain of that. We had spent a lot of time sorting and cleaning down here. I moved in closer and illuminated it with the light. The wooden door had an aged appearance, almost as ancient as the house itself. It was covered in odd markings that I didn't understand. They appeared to have been hand-carved. I extended my hand, my digits grazing the rugged surface. It had an empty feel about it, as though nothing substantial was there. A part of me wanted to turn around and head back upstairs just to be honest with myself. However, something drew me in. There was a subtle pull, like if the murmurs had come back, pushing me on. I turned the doorknob mindlessly. With a steady creak, the door opened to show blackness beyond. Not the type of darkness that occurs when all lights are off in a room. This seemed heavier, deeper, like gazing into nothingness. I took a step back. I had no idea what I was witnessing. However, I later became aware of it. A long, narrow hallway that seemed to go on forever. It would never fit inside the home. The cellar was not very large. After a little period of hesitation, I heard the whispering once more. They were more audible this time as they were emanating from the corridor walls. In the darkness, soft whispers echoed, seemingly just out of grasp. I moved inside, but I'm not sure why. There was no end in sight as the hallway continued on forever. The walls were chilly, composed of the same coarse stone as the entrance, and they had a lively aura. My footfalls resounded as I moved, and every now and then I thought I saw a glimpse of something, a glimmer of motion at the far end. Figures and shapes moved in and out of the darkness, but as soon as I peered closely, they vanished. When I turned to go, the door had vanished from its location. My chest began to tighten with panic. There was only the corridor, extending infinitely in both directions. The murmurs intensified, seeming to emanate from every nook and cranny of the room surrounding me. My breathing was difficult due to the chilly air and my racing heart. I was walking for what felt like hours, I'm not sure how long, looking for a way out. It was getting easier to make out the figures at the end of the corridor. Though human-shaped, they were distorted and incorrect. Their faces were beyond words, and their limbs moved in ways that they shouldn't have. Even though they were only shadows, they possessed a greater quality. At last, I discovered the door once more. It was waiting for me, just standing there as if it had always been there. Hurrying over to it, I grabbed the handle and yanked it open. The door banged behind me as soon as I passed through. I was back in the basement, but the atmosphere had changed. The whispering continued, and the air seemed thicker. They were still coming from the walls, and I could hear them, weak but steady. My spouse asked me what I was doing when she walked downstairs. I was unable to clarify it to her. How was I able to? She refused to accept me. The home had changed. Shadows shifted in unexpected places. Even with no one stepping on them, the floors made a creaking sound at night. Not to mention the whispers, which were constantly present but barely audible and got louder every night. The most detrimental aspect? The door was still there. It reappeared, this time in several rooms of the house, occasionally behind a bookcase, occasionally in a closet. We would locate it, shut it, and attempt to proceed. But it returned every time. We were unsure of what to do. The murmurs revealed to us unsettling information. They desired that we reopen the door. They said we would be at peace, but I had my doubts. It was more than simply a door. It was a portal, a doorway leading to a place other than this one, and it would not leave us alone once it was unlocked. We made an attempt to seal it, to permanently close it, but I fear it's too late. Nothing we released can be taken back. It is now observing, anticipating our next door opening.